Welcome, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by, having already reviewed the film from 1988 by the name of Beetlejuice. I thought it only made sense next to stop on by and review the film from 2024 by the name of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. No, I didn't stutter, that's the name of Beetlejuice Part 2. Basically a play on, just the character and having to say the name 3 times to conjure him up or whatever. And I did, hypothesize, and towards the end of my review of the first film, wonder if they were going to make a third film. I looked into it. Turns out that it's very possible, or maybe it's been greenlit, or maybe the idea, because the Beetlejuice 2, as it were, did such good business or whatever, that it's very possible we might get a Beetlejuice, aka Beetlejuice 3. I guess that would only make sense. So I probably, like a lot of people, was really surprised when I heard that this movie was going to happen, Beetlejuice 2, and not being a particularly big fan of the first film, never, I don't think, having owned it in any capacity at all, or not really being a big fan of the first film, since I was, maybe I liked it a little more when I was a kid and first saw it in the theater or whatever. I didn't really care one way or another about this. It was kind of interesting. I mean, let's face it, it follows the trend of making a sequel to a decades-old movie. I don't even know how old Beetlejuice. Yeah, I mean, it's pushing. The first film is pushing. Is going to be let's see, 4. Well, this came out in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So was it 30? What is 36 years old? Was the first film 36 years old when this movie came out? Quite possibly. Like, the first film's gonna for how many years from the 5, 6, 7, 8? So 4 years from the release of the second film. The second film. What the hell was I don't know what the hell I was saying. But anyway, Beetlejuice 2 is out, and I was really surprised, and I didn't really care too much about it. I figure I wouldn't pay money to see it. I figure I'd see it for free on streaming at some point. Obviously wasn't going to go to the theater to see it. Wasn't going to blind buy the Blu-ray, nothing like that. Did end up seeing it for no additional cost on Netflix. And because of I don't know what, I guess, as I'll get into, the overpacked nature of the film, I actually had to, when I first saw it, I first saw it with Beth, and I'm like, afterwards, I'm like, days later, it's like, yeah, I'm going to have to see it again so I can do more, a competent review. So I did end up watching the first movie with my mom, and then a week later we watched the second movie. So I did see Beetlejuice 2 again, so I can, and I took some notes, not during it, but I wrote down some notes afterwards that I can do a more comprehensive review of this film. First off the bat, it's so funny how it starts kind of like Top Gun 2, where it's like basically a carbon copy of the opening of the first Beetlejuice movie. Not surprising, same music, Danny Elfman, going over the town, and then of course it quietly turns into like a miniature shot or whatever, and then so it's just kind of interesting, quote unquote, that I don't know what it says about movies these days. Like Top Gun, also was like a sequel. The first sequel to a movie of 30 plus years old, and has the exact same opening credits, and it's just like Beetlejuice 2 does the same thing, and it's like kind of a symbol of like the lack of creativity in Hollywood, if I'm being completely honest, which I always try to do. And when the movie first starts, it's not completely horrible. It opens with Winona Ryder now, reprising her role as she last did when she was a teenager or whatever. And now very much with like the Ghostbusters 2, the Bill Murray character ends up being like some kind of a TV host or host of a spooky show, or Winona Ryder character is now a host of a kind of a paranormal show or whatever. And honestly, this scene was okay, and it was like interesting, and it's like, okay, well, this is fine. But then not long after that, we're kind of introduced to what I would regard as like the completely and totally annoying kind of guy who in her life that wants to marry her for reasons we find out later, and I'm not going to spoil that for you. You can trudge through the movie if you want to see that. But early on, I became very much aware of And it's funny how this movie kind of revealed its like sporadic just whatever nature so early on, and then we see, you know, we reconnect with the Winona Ryder character's mom, and I was just so shocked. I knew, of course, that Jeffrey Jones wasn't going to be in it, and I was curious as to, I may have mentioned this in my review of the first film, I don't remember. I was curious to see how they were going to handle the Jeffrey Jones bit. A lot of times in movies, when, you know, there's a lot of years pass between a movie and a sequel or something, sometimes they'll just have a sentence devoted to the character, like, oh, it's like, you know, Indiana Jones 4. You know, there's a couple pictures of, you know, Sean Connery and the guy who played Marcus or whatever, and there's just a line that says, yeah, it's been a rough couple of years. First, you know, Marcus and then Dad, or then, you know, first Dad and now Marcus, or whatever the hell it was. Like, usually that's what you do if someone from a previous film isn't in the current one or the next one, is you just devote a couple, you know, words to them. And, well, you know, oh, whatever. I was just so really surprised, and I'm disappointed, really, and how much the Jeffrey Jones character is a part of this movie. And they kind of, you know, one can only assume, as much as you see Jeffrey Jones' face and likeness in different versions, whether it's like probably a CG claymation animation of his plane going down into the ocean, or whether it's just a picture of him or a picture of him on the frickin' shark fin gravestone or whatever, or the picture in the paper, we keep seeing Jeffrey Jones' face. And then, much like the upside down Crispin Glover, you know, the fake Crispin Glover in Back to the Future 2, they see you know, conveniently he died where a shark bit his head off, and we see this corpse in the afterlife walking around, and obviously conveniently with no head, but they do have some guy playing Jeffrey Jones's voice, and it's just like, what in the, I didn't expect that at all. Like, Jesus Christ, they're making this, you know, we're not going to put Jeffrey Jones in the movie, but we're going to keep using his likeness, and we're going to have him be this recurring, like, just character that pops up for no good reason, much like the Matrix 2 and 3 quote-unquote sexy chick, you know, freaking goth woman, you know, Bride of Frankenstein character that inexplicably just pops up out of boxes and assembles herself in an overly long, you know, self-assembled CG gore scene. And it's just like, oh my God. And, you know, at first you're kind of thinking, well, maybe this is Beetlejuice or something, but no, it turns out to be this woman who, of course, while she's assembling herself, you know, we've never seen her before, so as she's assembling herself, you're kind of watching going, okay, what are we watching? Who is this? You know, I suppose we'll find out later. We end up finding out later, but let me just say this right now. This movie, it's very common these days, is just, in my opinion, just way too much going on. Like, when I watched this, and especially when I saw it the second time, I'm like, you know what, this seems like it's 2 or maybe even 3 movies, 2 or 3 different movie ideas for sequels to Beetlejuice crammed in to one movie. Like, you know, pitches, or maybe different pitches, different people pitch different ideas for sequels, and they're like, oh wow, I like that idea, but then I like this idea from this other guy. What do we do? Which one do we do? Well, let's do both of them. Let's do all 3 of them. Let's just cram this movie full of all of this, like 3 or 4 different like plot points, and we'll have just all of it happening, and just cut from one thing back to this, to that, to this. I remember back in 1992 we saw Batman Returns in the theater, and at that time, not only being disgusted about, you know, going to a movie in the summer, having to watch something with snow, you know, going on the ground and taking place around Christmas and stuff, but not only that, like, I felt they were just trying to juggle way too many like bad characters. We got to introduce, you know, the Penguin, we got to introduce Catwoman, and still try to juggle Bruce Wayne and Batman, which of course they don't even do. It's basically about Catwoman and mostly the Penguin and his exploits. It's like, it's the same thing with this movie. Like, we got way too, we want to do way too much, and by attempting to do way too much, we just do a little bit of this here, a little bit of that here, a little bit of that here and that, and then we'll go back to this stitched together woman, back to just seeing the, you know, the guy, Jeffrey Jones character walking around. Just, we'll see that. Then we'll see what's going on with you know, the daughter of Winona Ryder. Then we'll go here, and it's just like, you know, it seems like there's like 30 or 40 minutes that goes by without seeing the stitched together woman, and then she shows up 40 minutes later, and you're like, oh yeah, that's right, she's in this movie. And it's just like, what the hell is going on? And a lot of the movie spends time with, like I say, the Winona Ryder, love interest guy is annoying as shit. Her mom's annoying as shit. There's so many annoying as shit characters. Granted, the daughter of the Winona Ryder character is probably the least annoying. I'm not gonna, Winona Ryder character is not even annoying, but there's a lot of annoying characters in the movie. The Beetlejuice stuff, I was kind of disappointed. The Beetlejuice stuff is fine. Michael Keaton does a great job doing his Beetlejuice stuff. I was kind of surprised, maybe a little disappointed about how just nonchalantly we introduced Beetlejuice in this movie. Like maybe it should have been a little more. It was kind of early, honestly, for my taste, strangely enough, and maybe a little later into the movie and introduce him maybe in a little bigger of a way, but whatever. Michael Keaton's fine as Beetlejuice, and I will say, as much as I'm trashing on this movie, there's a decent amount of like fun Beetlejuice, tomfoolery or whatever. If there's anything to say good about this movie, is they got the Beetlejuice tomfoolery right, and because of, I guess, maybe the current day special effects were able to maybe do a little more than they could do in 1988. And that's another thing. Beetlejuice has this room full of the shrunken head characters that are all at typewriters working for him or whatever. And they kind of take that character from the first film, the shrunken head, and just clone them and have the whole room full of the shrunken head characters. Later on, they're running all over the town on Halloween. And it just reminded me of Super Mario Brothers from 1993, because they do the same thing. And I guess there's some animatronic, real world, animatronic, work, puppetry or animatronic stuff in this movie. And I guess, kudos, more power to them for maybe doing a mixture of CGI stuff and old school, like, animatronic puppetry or whatever. But that's kind of one of my complaints about these shrunken head characters, is they're all walking around, and if you know anything about how they do this stuff, is they build the coat a little, about this much more higher than normal, so you can accommodate the performer's head within it. And then on top of that, you're going to have like the shrunken head, and as a result, all these characters all have basically a torso that's a foot or more taller than it should be, and it looks all disproportionate, and they're running around doing this and that, and you're not supposed to notice, but I noticed, because I noticed those things. And those characters, honestly, I guess, because maybe the shrunken head character was kind of famous from the first movie, they like, well, we'll have a whole bunch of these guys who are basically Beetlejuice's, helpers or minions or whatever in this movie, and not too keen on that per se. I don't know if you noticed, but I wasn't too keen on the Beetlejuice, what turns out, the stitched together, quote unquote, aging hot chick from Matrix 2 and 3. She turns out to be, I don't know how much, I don't know if I'm going to put a spoiler thing in the title of this video, probably, but she turns out to be, Beetlejuice's former wife or whatever. And, I have no problem with, sharing, revealing something about like the backstory of Beetlejuice. Honestly, that was a plot point of this movie that, I did find kind of humorous. But she's the, the wife of, estranged wife of Beetlejuice, and I'm not going to just, explain everything about it, but she's after Beetlejuice. And it was, one thing I thought was kind of funny about this movie is there's a scene where Beetlejuice is telling some character, I can't even remember which character, I'd have to see it a third time to try to remember that, but telling a character about his past and actually his life before, dying, which was actually kind of interesting and unexpected. Like, I didn't think we'd ever necessarily, it didn't even occur to me, as Beetlejuice in the first film was, introduced as an undead, ghoul or whatever the hell he is. It didn't even occur to me to see Beetlejuice's life before his death, and it was, I'm not going to spoil that aspect of it. I mean, needless to say, it was kind of humorous or whatever, but the way they do the flashback of Beetlejuice's life before death or whatever, or cause of death or whatever, is by cutting to black and white and having all of a sudden he's speaking in Italian. So it's kind of like a 1960s Italian movie all of a sudden, when it kind of adds a little bit of humor that's kind of humorous, all of a sudden just talking in Italian and black and white and all this and that. So I mean, that aspect of like the flashback with Beetlejuice's, past and history with, maybe possibly his life before death, or, and cause of death, and, the backstory with his, wife or estranged wife or whatever, why, whatever. That aspect was kind of interesting. So I'm not going to dog on the whole movie. There are things about it that were kind of interesting, and you know, the flashbacks in black and white in Italian was kind of funny. Even though Danny Elfman returns, of course, to do the music, you know, I didn't really catch any, I've seen this twice now, and I didn't catch any, you know, amazing new themes that stuck out. It was kind of interesting to hear a new rendition of the classic Beetlejuice music, but like I say, no new themes particularly stuck out. I'm not saying that there are no new themes, there's gotta be, but the only thing I remember hearing was kind of the more, you know, familiar Beetlejuice themes, and anything new that he would have written for the film, you know, having seen it twice, wasn't impactful enough up front, you know, or in your face to make me, you know, you know, whatever you call it, notice it, I guess we'll say. As I said, the you know, the majority of, I guess, of the Beetlejuice scenes, especially when people say his name 3 times or whatever, which I want to say only happened like 2 times, I think, in the movie possibly, but the Beetlejuice scenes, you know, for the most part were fine, and you know, Michael Keaton back doing what he does, you know, wonderfully or whatever. Obviously, being the age he is, he's a little less, you know, spry, and he kind of doesn't move around as much or whatever, but he's still obviously able to do the character. There's a baby Beetlejuice, which reminded me just completely of Dead Alive, aka Brain Dead, that, what's his name? What the hell's his name? Peter Jackson did back in the day. Of course, that was early 90s, and pretty sure I saw Dead Alive in 93 or 94, so this whole baby Beetlejuice thing, you know, that's a problem when you get on in years like I am, and you've seen so many movies and stuff, that it's going to be hard for, you know, if you see a new movie, you know, it's going to be hard for new movies to not kind of retread what you've already seen, you know, spending nearly 50 years on this, you know, rock ball or whatever the hell it is in this, you know, solar system, whatever we're told. You know, it's going to be hard to do things that, you know, aren't, you know, retreads of things you've already seen. As a matter of fact, you know, the woman putting herself together and being the soul sucker, and it just seemed like I've seen that, you know, definitely that aspect of Beetlejuice's wife, you know, it seems like I've seen that a bazillion times in the past as well. Baby Beetlejuice is just like the, you know, zombie baby, and, you know, Dead Alive, aka Brain Dead or whatever. So, I mean, you know, it's, you know, I mean, yeah. So, there's a baby Beetlejuice who reminds me of the baby zombie from Dead Alive. There's one scene where we do see the classic whatever the hell desert with the sandworm scene, and one thing I will say to kind of, you know, not trash on this movie as much, one thing I'll say as a compliment to this movie is they have a sandworm, of course, that I think makes a couple appearances in the movie, one in the, you know, the desert and one in a scene that I won't spoil. But what was kind of interesting about the sandworm thing, which of course would have been animated in 1988 in the original film, they kind of, yeah, although I can only assume this is computer generated sandworm, maybe it's not, maybe it is animated, but either way, if it is computer generated, I appreciated the fact that they made it look animated like the 1988 version. It's possible it's animated, but I would doubt it's animated. Like the animation with like the Jeffrey Jones character going down in the plane, I can only assume that looked like, you know, the claymation kind of stuff, but I can only assume that's CG'd to look like claymation. I'm not 100% sure. I didn't research the making of this movie or anything, but that's one thing I will say is I appreciated the fact that whether it was animated or not, the sandworm, you know, presumably created with, you know, computer generated effects, at least had the animated appearance in motion, as, you know, so it matched the sandworm from the film from 1988. So I'll you know, I can at least say that as a positive about this film. Towards the end of the movie, without revealing too much, they mentioned something about a Soul Train, which of course is a play on the Soul Train, whatever, of the 70s or whatever. And one thing I will say, when the Soul Train, you know, actually arrives and the people are all dancing to 70s music and dressed in 70s gear, it's like, initially it's like, yeah, that's pretty fun, that's pretty cool. But my only complaint with that is, as I kind of think when the scene kind of maybe is twice as long as it needs to be, or at least maybe a quarter longer than it needs to be. Not only that, but then we see that same kind of Soul Train scene or location again, and I want to say with the dancing and the music, and it's just like, yeah, not only do we see it probably for too long, you know, maybe it's a little overplayed when we initially saw the Soul Train the first time. Not only is it overplayed in my opinion for the first time, but then we see it again, which is completely wearing out its welcome. This is obviously just all my personal opinions. If you happen to like the Soul Train scenes and think there's not enough Soul Train scenes in the movie, that's your prerogative. But I particularly, I kind of think that Soul Train bit is maybe a little, overly used in this film. Without spoiling too much, I'll simply say my favorite part of the movie was the end in the building where people are known to get married in kind of a building, a building of worship, if you will. The film ends there, and they kind of, the same kind of thing that was going to happen towards the end of the original film starts to happen, and what proceeds to happen in that scene I thought was the most creative and entertaining aspect of this movie. And I'm glad they saved it for the end because, instead of doing it like at the beginning or in the middle or something, and that scene I did actually think was interesting and a nice homage to the scene from around the dinner table in the first Beetlejuice film. And the song, I don't think I'd ever heard that song. I can only assume that's an actual song from the 70s, but yeah, whether it is or not, it's a kind of a fun song. Yeah, it kind of makes me want to research it. I can only assume it's a song from the 70s, but if you've seen the film, you know what the hell I'm talking about. That end scene was in fact my favorite scene in the movie. One thing before I wrap up the review I do want to comment on is the character, the goings on. As I said, it seems like there's 3 or 4 different things we got going on. We just keep going all around back and forth between them all. The bit going on with, I guess, the daughter situation, and what happens with the daughter and all that, I'll just simply say without spoiling it, that the daughter's story arc and what ends up happening with her. I mean, I guess, obviously it was surprising. It's a surprise, twist to that stuff going on. And that was surprising, I guess, but and then it's like this payoff, which, is kind of like, Beetlejuice kind of really kicks ass with the payoff with that thing or whatever. But then it's just kind of like, like for multiple viewings, that aspect or that story, that particular story, was not particularly going to be that interesting. Not that I plan to have multiple viewings of this movie, but that's something I wanted to say, like that, that the whole, whatever you want to call it, the story scene, story bit with the daughter character of Winona Ryder is like, obviously it's going to be the most effective on the first viewing, and then, subsequent viewings you'll just be almost want to like fast forward because you know what the hell's coming or whatever. But yeah, just a little nitpick. Oh, and also another thing I'll say before I end the review is I'm a big fan of like the original Carrie Brian De Palma film, and even bigger fan of the amazing score written by Pino. I still can't remember how to pronounce his last name, but Donaggio or whatever. The beautiful music he wrote for Carrie. They actually used the Carrie music at the end of this movie during a scene. I was just like, that was just so out of left field and something more like Quentin Tarantino would do. Just use music from another movie from the 70s. It's just like, that was just so weird to me, and the ending of the movie was kind of goofy or whatever. So yeah, so I guess I probably talked about this more than I intended to, but that can happen on this channel. Having seen it twice, I mean, I think it's kind of all over the place with spatterings of decentness. Like the Beetlejuice stuff is more or less fine. You get sick of looking at them, shrunken head people walking all around with their elongated torsos, upper halves, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of things you get sick of. The asshole guy who wants to marry Winona Ryder. You get sick of her mom. You get sick of seeing Jeffrey Jones and not seeing him at the same time. Someone, Crispin Glovering it up and pretending to be his voice. And it makes you wonder, did I already say this in this video? That makes you wonder if Jeffrey Jones God, you'd have to think, especially after the Back to the Future Crispin Glover debacle, you think he would have had to get some money for using his face or his likeness in this movie, and Jiminy Christmas. But mostly garbage in my opinion, with some aspects that were fun, mainly Michael Keaton Beetlejuice stuff, some genuinely kind of funny goings on. My star rating for the Beetlejuice 2, as it were, I can only go, what the hell, we'll go 1 and yeah, it's such a kind of a garbled mess. I didn't even mention that one guy who played the cop actor or whatever. That was kind of funny. That's what I mean. Like, there's just, It's like it's 3 or 4 different movies in one movie. Just way too much going on. My star rating, it's between 1.5 and 1 3/4 stars. Tell you what, it's such a garbled mess. We'll go 1.5 stars out of 4 stars for Beetlejuice 2. Yeah, I mean, I'll probably buy the Blu-ray if it ends up being $3, clearance, half price books at some point. I did think, you know, the movie looked okay, you know, and I appreciated the 1:8:5 aspect ratio instead of going like the super wide BS, and they kept to that aspect ratio, and you know, some things were okay, but you know, mostly not okay in my opinion. Just too many annoying characters. But I mean, there were, you know, they were annoying characters in the first movie as well. But yeah, you know, the Beetlejuice stuff was okay, but I don't know. A lot of the new stuff I didn't really like. Some of the new stuff was okay. I guess the, you know, the undead cop actor guy with the part of his, you know, side of his head missing was kind of interesting. Beetlejuice character. I mean, it was interesting to see the back to the world of the undead Beetlejuice character again, and characters and stuff they came up with or whatever. But you know, obviously as a whole, I just felt like it was a garbled mess more or less. So I guess that'll pretty much do it for my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, we'll catch you on the next video.